In 1999, 47 people in one small Texas town were arrested for dealing cocaine in a single sweep. The town, Tulia, had fewer than 5,000 residents, and most of the people hauled in shared one thing: they were black.
There to get this thing. Campsite 6.
There was no seized stash of drugs on record, no wired money, no surveillance footage. Nearly the entire case rested on the word of one man. That man was an undercover agent named Tom Coleman. His testimony alone was the pillar that convicted 38 of the 47 arrested. And years later, the state of Texas admitted just how fragile that pillar had been. Governor Rick Perry pardoned 35 of the 38 people who had been sent to prison. Why does a single county drug bust from over 2 decades ago still matter? Because it became one of the most infamous examples of how the American war on drugs could turn a whole community into targets, convict dozens on the say-so of one agent, and only unravel after national outrage forced a second look. Here is what actually happened. In 1999, 47 individuals, the majority of them African American, were arrested in Tulia on charges of cocaine dealing. The charges came out of an undercover operation carried out by Agent Tom Coleman. When the cases went to trial, Coleman's testimony was the crucial evidence. On the strength of what he told juries, 38 of the 47 were convicted. Many went to prison, but the story did not stay buried in Swisher County. It was picked up by national media, from the New York Times to 60 Minutes, from People magazine to A&E networks. That coverage put the convictions under a spotlight, and the case against Coleman's credibility grew until the outcome was reversed at the highest level of the state. Governor Rick Perry pardoned 35 of the 38 people who had been incarcerated. To understand how one agent could arrest 47 people in a town this size, you have to look at the money behind it. In 1994, as part of the United States War on Drugs, President Bill Clinton signed into law the Violent Crime Control and Law Enforcement Act. The first draft of that congressional bill was written by then Senator Joe Biden of Delaware in cooperation with the National Association of Police Organizations, and it was sponsored by Representative Jack Brooks of Texas. That law poured resources into policing across the country. Nationwide, states received 100,000 new police officers, $9.7 billion in funding for prisons, and $6.1 billion for prevention programs. But there was a detail that mattered enormously in a place like Tulia. Local task forces received funding tied to each arrest and each conviction they made, and that money could be used however they pleased the following year. Think about what that incentive does. In Tulia, and in small towns like it, the more people a task force arrested, and the more it convicted, the more funding it collected to spend the next year. The reward was attached to the count of arrests, not to the strength of the evidence behind them. It is a structure that quietly pushes toward more busts, more charges, more convictions, whether or not each case is sound. That is the backdrop against which one undercover agent could sweep up 47 people, secure 38 convictions on his testimony, and see it hold until the national press and, eventually, the governor intervened. Tulia itself is an ordinary place, the county seat of Swisher County, a center for farming and agribusiness with a population that has slipped from just under 5,000 toward around 4,400. The pardons closed the immediate wound, but the deeper question lingers. When funding rewards the number of arrests rather than the truth of them, and when dozens of convictions can rest on a single voice, how many other Tulias never made the front page? The case remains a cautionary marker of what happens when the incentives of policing and the burden of proof pull in opposite directions. That's it for this one. Watch this next: why Al-Shabaab bombed a World Cup crowd in Uganda.